The first scream came before anyone understood what had changed. It tore across the training ground, sharp, guttural, and abruptly cut off as something heavy slammed into the metal floor. Then another followed. And another. Within seconds, the entire chamber descended into chaos. No alarms sounded. Not yet. Rows of alien recruits, towering, armored, bred for war on worlds far harsher than most, suddenly dropped as if struck by an invisible hammer. Limbs buckled. Knees shattered against reinforced plating. One massive reptilian cadet tried to rise, only to collapse again, his claws scraping uselessly against the ground. At the center of it all stood Drill Sergeant Varkesh, unmoving, watching. His 4 eyes narrowed slightly as he observed the carnage unfolding before him. He had not given any command. He had not barked any order, but he had made a decision, and now he was waiting to see the result. High above the training arena, hidden behind reinforced observation glass, a technician's voice trembled over the comm. "Sergeant, gravity levels have exceeded authorized limits." Varkesh didn't respond immediately. Below him, another cadet slammed face first into the floor, the impact echoing like a gunshot. Bones cracked. The sound was unmistakable. Still, no alarm. "Sergeant," the voice came again, more urgent now, "we are reading a 200% increase. This is outside survivable parameters for most species present." Varkesh's jaw tightened. "Maintain current levels," he said flatly. A pause. "That will result in... I am aware of the consequences." Silence followed, because everyone knew what that meant. This wasn't an accident. This was a test. On the training floor, panic spread faster than reason. Orders were shouted in 6 languages, none of them coherent. Medics at the perimeter hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or await command authorization. Most of the recruits weren't thinking at all anymore. They were just trying to breathe. The weight pressing down on them was unbearable, like being crushed beneath a collapsing mountain. Muscles screamed. Lungs fought for air that suddenly felt too thick to draw in. Even the strongest among them were pinned helplessly in place. Another body hit the ground. Then another. And another. Until nearly all of them had fallen. All except one. At first, no one noticed him. There was too much noise. Too much confusion. Too many bodies hitting the floor. But slowly, something began to feel wrong. Amid the chaos, a single figure was still moving. Not struggling. Not collapsing. Moving. Steady. Controlled. Almost unaffected. Varkesh saw him immediately. Of course he did. His gaze locked onto the lone upright recruit as if pulled by gravity stronger than anything in the room. The human. The smallest one in the entire unit. Physically unimpressive by every known standard. Shorter, lighter, softer. No natural armor. No visible enhancements. No biological advantages worth noting. And yet, he was still standing. The human adjusted his footing slightly, boots scraping against the metal floor. He exhaled slowly, shoulders rising and falling in a measured rhythm. Then he resumed the exercise. One step forward. Another. Each movement deliberate. Controlled. Unaffected. A nearby cadet, twice his size and built like a living tank, reached out weakly from the ground. "How?" the alien rasped, voice barely audible under the crushing force. "How are you? Still moving?" The human didn't answer. He didn't even look at him. Instead, he continued forward, as if the question hadn't been asked at all, as if nothing had changed. Above, the technician's voice returned, quieter now, edged with something new. Fear. Sergeant, we are isolating anomalous readings. Varkesh didn't blink. Clarify. There is one life form not responding to gravitational escalation. A pause. Then, more hesitantly, the human. Of course it was. Varkesh's gaze never left the training floor. Increase gravity, he said. This time, there was no immediate response. Sergeant, the technician whispered, we are already beyond safe operational limits. Further escalation risks total fatality across. Do it. The word cut through the calm like a blade. Below, the effect was instantaneous. The air seemed to thicken. The floor groaned under the strain, and every remaining conscious recruit slammed down harder, bodies forced flat as the crushing force intensified beyond reason. A collective, broken chorus of pain filled the chamber. Bones fractured, armor bent. Some stopped moving entirely. It was over for them. It should have been over for all of them. But not for him. The human staggered. Just for a moment. A single misstep. His knee dipped slightly toward the ground, and then stopped. He inhaled. Slow, deep, controlled. Then he straightened. Fully. Varkesh felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. The human rolled his shoulders once, as if loosening stiff muscles after a long rest. His neck cracked softly as he tilted his head from side to side, and then he kept walking. Not faster, not slower, just the same. Like the crushing weight bearing down on the entire room was nothing more than an inconvenience. Or worse, something he had felt before. Up in the observation deck, no one spoke anymore, because there was nothing left to say. The numbers didn't make sense. The outcome didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. Except one thing. Varkesh leaned forward slightly, his voice low, almost to himself. What are you? Below, the human reached the end of the training lane. He paused, turned, and for the first time since the test began, he looked up. Not at the fallen recruits, not at the medics, not at the chaos surrounding him, but directly at the observation window, at Varkesh. Their eyes met, and in that moment something cold and certain settled into the drill sergeant's mind. This wasn't resilience. This wasn't training. This wasn't luck. This was something else. Something the galaxy had never measured, never tested, never understood. The human gave a small nod, then stepped forward again, as if waiting for the next challenge. No one gave the order to stop the exercise, and that was the most terrifying part. The chamber should have been in full lockdown by now. Emergency protocols dictated immediate shutdown under lethal environmental deviation. Medical teams should have flooded the floor. Gravity regulators should have reset automatically. But none of that happened, because Drill Sergeant Varkesh hadn't moved, and no one outranked him here. So the weight remained, crushing, relentless, unforgiving. Across the training ground, the last conscious alien recruits clung to the edge of awareness. Some twitched weakly, others lay completely still, their armored bodies pressed flat against the reinforced metal like discarded husks. A few tried to crawl, dragging themselves inch by inch, only to collapse again under the unbearable force. The sounds had changed. No longer screams. Now it was quieter, broken breathing, low groans. the occasional crack of something giving out under pressure. And through it all, footsteps, steady, even, unhurried. The human kept moving. Each step landed with a dull, controlled thud, boots meeting the metal floor with precision that bordered on mechanical. There was no panic in his posture, no strain visible in his movements, just a quiet, deliberate rhythm that continued as if the rest of the world had fallen away. One step, then another, then another. Varkesh watched every motion, analyzed every shift in balance, every breath, every microscopic sign of stress. He saw none. That was impossible. Even the strongest species in the known systems would have been reduced to immobility under these conditions. Muscular failure alone should have rendered movement impossible. Circulatory collapse should have followed. Organ rupture. Neural shutdown. Death. And yet, the human adjusted his grip on a weighted training bar resting across his shoulders, a bar that was now effectively several times heavier than intended. He lowered himself slowly into a squat, controlled, measured, then rose again, smoothly. No shaking, no hesitation. The comm channel crackled softly. "Sergeant," the technician's voice returned, strained and uncertain. "We are detecting no structural degradation in the human subject. Musculoskeletal integrity remains stable." Another pause. "That is not possible." Varkesh didn't respond, because he was starting to realize something worse. It wasn't just that the human was surviving. He was adapting. On the floor, one of the alien recruits managed to lift his head just enough to see the impossible figure moving past him. It was a hulking creature from a high-gravity world. Dense bones, layered muscle, built specifically for conditions that would crush lesser beings. And yet, he couldn't even raise himself to his knees. His vision blurred, but the image remained clear enough. The human, walking, lifting, breathing, unaffected. "Monster," the alien whispered, voice barely audible. The human paused, just briefly, not from exhaustion, from awareness. He turned his head slightly, eyes settling on the fallen recruit. For a moment, it seemed like he might respond, might acknowledge the word. But instead, he simply shifted the weight on his shoulders and continued forward, unbothered, unchanged. Above, the observation deck had gone silent. Not the silence of discipline, the silence of disbelief. Every sensor reading was being rechecked. Every system diagnostic rerun. The possibility of malfunction had been eliminated again and again. The numbers were correct. Gravity levels remained far beyond survivable thresholds. And yet one life form continued to operate within them. Varkesh's claws tightened behind his back. "Increase it again," he said. This time, the response came immediately. "No." The word hung in the air, sharp, defiant. Varkesh's eyes flicked upward toward the observation crew. "You will follow my orders." "With respect, Sergeant," the technician replied, voice shaking but resolute. "Further increase will result in total loss of all remaining recruits. We are already beyond recovery margins." Varkesh turned slightly, just enough for one of his eyes to fix on the reinforced glass above. "They are already lost." Silence. No one argued with that, because it was true. Then, more quietly, almost thoughtfully, he added, "But he is not. That was the point. That was the question. What made the human different?" On the floor, the human reached the far end of the training lane again. This time, he didn't turn immediately. Instead, he set the weighted bar down carefully, lowering it to the ground with controlled precision. The metal groaned under the force, the impact heavier than anything the equipment had been designed to. He straightened slowly, rolled his shoulders once, then exhaled. A long, steady breath. Finally, there was a sign of effort. Subtle, barely visible, but real. Varkesh saw it instantly. So did the sensors. Heart rate elevated, the technician reported. Respiration increased by 12%. Muscular strain, minimal but present. The human was feeling it. But only now. Only after levels that had already incapacitated every other being in the room. Varkesh leaned forward slightly. Fascinating. Below, the human lifted his head again, and once more his gaze found the observation window. This time he didn't nod. He didn't acknowledge. He just looked. Calm. Steady. Waiting. As if he understood exactly what was happening. As if he knew this wasn't over. Varkesh felt it then. Not fear. Not yet. But something close. Anticipation. Because this wasn't a test of endurance anymore. This was a discovery. And discoveries came with consequences. Slowly, deliberately, the drill sergeant reached toward the control console beside him. His claw hovered over the input panel. The technician's voice dropped to a whisper. "Sergeant, what are you doing?" Varkesh didn't look away from the human. Finding the limit. And then he pressed down. Hard. The moment Varkesh pressed the control panel, the entire facility reacted. Not with alarms. With resistance. Deep within the station's core systems, fail-safes triggered instantly, layers of protective protocols designed to prevent exactly this scenario. Power fluctuations rippled through the gravity generators as automated governors attempted to override the command. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then Varkesh overrode them all. Authorization codes cascaded through the system, one after another, each more restricted than the last. His rank alone wasn't enough for this level of control. But his intent was. The gravity spiked. Not gradually. Not safely. Violently. The floor screamed. That was the only way to describe it. The reinforced alloy beneath the recruits let out a high-pitched metallic groan as the increased force pushed it to structural limits it was never meant to endure. And on the training ground, everything broke. The remaining conscious recruits didn't just collapse this time. They were crushed. Bodies slammed flat with brutal finality. Armor buckled inward. Limbs twisted unnaturally under the sudden, overwhelming pressure. Whatever resistance they had left vanished in an instant. Even the medics at the perimeter were forced to their knees, their specialized suits whining under the strain before locking them in place. The chamber fell into a suffocating stillness. No more crawling. No more struggling. Only silence. Except footsteps. They didn't stop. They didn't even falter. The human staggered again, but only for a heartbeat. His foot slipped half an inch. His body dipped. And then he caught himself. Muscles tightened. Posture corrected. Balance restored. He inhaled sharply this time, the first real sign of effort breaking through his otherwise controlled rhythm. The air itself felt heavier now, pressing into his lungs like liquid steel. But he adapted. Faster than anything Varkesh had ever seen. The human stance shifted subtly, feet spreading just slightly wider, knees bending to redistribute the load. His center of gravity lowered instinctively, compensating for the increased force with a precision that no training simulation could have taught. This wasn't learned behavior. This was instinct, raw, refined, perfected under conditions far beyond anything in this facility. Above, the observation crew stared in horror. "Gravity levels at 300%, the technician whispered. "Structural integrity of the chamber is approaching failure thresholds." Another voice joined in, panicked. "We're going to lose the entire deck if this continues." But Varkesh didn't respond. He couldn't, because for the first time since this began, the human stopped walking. Not because he couldn't continue, because he chose to. Slowly, deliberately, the human straightened his back. Fully. Against 3 times standard gravity. The movement alone should have been impossible. Every joint, every muscle, every fiber of his being should have screamed in protest. Instead, he stood, still, unmoving, and then he did something no one expected. He smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't dramatic. Just a small, almost imperceptible curve at the corner of his mouth. But it changed everything, because it wasn't the expression of someone surviving. It was the expression of someone recognizing something, understanding it. Above, one of the observers whispered, barely audible, "He's not struggling." Another finished the thought, voice hollow, "He's adjusting." On the floor, the human rolled his neck slowly, the faint crack echoing unnaturally loud in the silent chamber. He flexed his fingers once, then clenched them into a fist. Testing, measuring, adapting. Then he took a step. Heavier this time. Slower, but still controlled. Still deliberate. The metal beneath his boot dented slightly with the impact. Another step followed. Then another. Each one carving shallow impressions into the reinforced floor. Varkesh's breathing slowed. Not from calm. From focus. Because this wasn't just endurance anymore. This wasn't even adaptation. This was escalation. The human wasn't merely surviving the increased gravity. He was beginning to move within it. Master it. The comm channel erupted again. "Sergeant, we are detecting abnormal energy distribution within the human subject. Clarify. It's not external. No augmentation, no tech. This is biological. His muscle fibers are reorganizing under stress, increasing density, efficiency." "That's not possible," another voice snapped. "It's happening." Below, the human paused again. This time, he bent down, slowly, every movement precise, every motion controlled. He reached toward the ground and grasped the weighted training bar he had set down earlier. Under normal conditions, it had been heavy. Under double gravity, nearly unmanageable. Now, at triple gravity, it should have been immovable. The human tightened his grip. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the bar shifted. Just slightly. The metal groaned in protest. The human exhaled sharply, muscles along his arms and shoulders tightening visibly now. Veins stood out beneath his skin. His jaw clenched for the first time. Effort. Real effort. But not failure. Not even close. With a slow, steady pull, he lifted it. The bar rose off the ground, inch by inch, defying every law the observers thought they understood. A collective gasp filled the observation deck. One of the technicians stepped back, shaking his head. This isn't training anymore." No one disagreed. because they were all seeing the same thing now. This wasn't a test of limits. It was the absence of them. The human adjusted the bar across his shoulders once more. Then, despite everything, he began to move again. Step, step, step. Each impact heavier than the last. Each movement more certain. As if the crushing force surrounding him was no longer an obstacle, but a challenge he had already accepted. Above, Varkesh finally spoke again. Quiet, measured, almost reverent. Increase it. For the first time since the test began, the system refused. Varkesh's final command didn't trigger an immediate response. No surge, no violent shift in pressure, no catastrophic spike. Instead, the console beneath his claw flashed red. Access denied. A cold, synthetic voice followed. Maximum gravitational threshold reached. Further escalation will result in total structural failure. Command override locked. Silence filled the observation deck. Then the alarms began. Not subtle warnings. Full emergency sirens. Harsh, blaring, impossible to ignore. Structural integrity critical. Reactor strain exceeding safe parameters. Gravitational containment field destabilizing. The entire facility trembled. Panels along the walls flickered as power rerouted desperately to keep the system from collapsing in on itself. Fine cracks began to spread across sections of the reinforced viewing glass, not enough to shatter, but enough to remind everyone just how close they were to disaster. And still, the gravity held. 3 times standard. Sustained. Unforgiving. On the training floor, nothing moved. No recruits struggled anymore. No medics tried to intervene. Every alien in the chamber had reached their limit, and past it. Some lay unconscious. Others didn't move at all. The silence down there wasn't peaceful. It was final, except for one thing. A single, steady rhythm. Footsteps. The human was still moving. But something had changed. The ease was gone, not replaced by panic or desperation, but by something far more intense. Focus. Every step now carried weight, not just from the crushing force, but from the effort required to push against it. His movements were slower, yes, more deliberate, but not weakened. Refined. Perfected. Each motion calculated down to the smallest detail. He wasn't just enduring the gravity anymore. He was working within it. The weighted bar remained across his shoulders, pressing him downward with unimaginable force. The metal had begun to warp slightly under the stress, bending where it rested against his grip. And still, he carried it. Above, the observation crew could barely process what they were seeing. His vitals, one of them whispered, staring at the data stream. They've stabilized. That's impossible, another replied. At these levels, his body should be shutting down. It's not. The first technician swallowed hard. It's adapting faster than the stress can break it. Varkesh didn't move. Didn't speak, didn't blink, because he finally understood what he was looking at. This wasn't a creature resisting its limits. This was a creature redefining them. On the floor, the human came to a stop once more. This time, not at the end of the training lane. In the center. Surrounded by still bodies. By silence. By the aftermath of something no one had intended to unleash. Slowly, he lifted his head. Not toward the observation deck. Not yet. Instead, he looked around. At the fallen recruits. at the unmoving medics, at the destruction the test had caused. For a moment, something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not pride, something quieter. Recognition, understanding. Then, he moved again, but not forward, up. With a controlled motion, the human bent his knees slightly, adjusting his stance beneath the crushing weight. His muscles tightened, every fiber engaging at once. The bar across his shoulders creaked loudly now, the metal visibly deforming under the combined force. Above, a technician leaned closer to the display, eyes widening. "What is he doing?" No one answered, because they all saw it at the same time. The human was preparing to lift. Not the bar. Himself. Against triple gravity. He inhaled. Slow. Deep. Then, he pushed. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the floor beneath his boots cracked. A sharp, jagged fracture spread outward as his legs drove downward with impossible force. The reinforced plating, designed to withstand heavy combat machinery, gave way under the pressure, and the human rose. Not high, not dramatically, just enough. Enough to prove it could be done. Enough to break the last assumption anyone in that room still held. He held there for a moment, balanced against a force that should have crushed him flat. Then he lowered himself back down. Controlled. Deliberate. Complete. The bar bent further as it settled against his shoulders again. Above, the alarms screamed louder. Containment failure imminent. Gravity core destabilization at critical levels. Evacuation protocols. Silence, Varkesh said. The single word cut through everything. Not loud, not forceful, but absolute. The alarms continued, but the voices stopped, because now, finally, there was nothing left to question. Varkesh stepped closer to the observation glass, his reflection faintly visible against the fractured surface. Below, the human lifted his head once more. This time, their eyes met again, and there was no confusion left, no uncertainty, no curiosity, only understanding. The human shifted his stance slightly, adjusting the weight across his shoulders as if preparing for something more, as if expecting it, waiting for it. But it wasn't coming, because for the first time since this began, Varkesh did nothing. No command, no escalation, no test, just observation, because he had already seen the answer. There was no breaking point. Not here. Not under these conditions. Maybe not at all. The alarms continued to blare. The facility continued to strain. The system hovered on the edge of collapse. But none of that mattered anymore, because the truth had already revealed itself. Slowly, deliberately, Varkesh reached toward the console once more. Not to increase, not to push further, but to end it. His claw hovered over the control, paused, then pressed, and for the first time since the nightmare began, the gravity started to fall. The moment the gravity began to fall, everything changed. It didn't happen instantly. The system was too strained, too close to collapse to allow a rapid reset. Instead, the crushing force eased in slow, controlled increments, like a vice reluctantly loosening its grip. 300%, 280, 250. With each drop, the chamber let out a low, echoing groan, the metal framework settling as unimaginable stress began to lift. Cracks stopped spreading. Panels flickered back to life. The alarms, once deafening, shifted into a lower, steadier tone. But on the training floor, nothing moved. The fallen recruits remained exactly where they were, their bodies still pressed into the metal. For most, the damage had already been done. Muscles torn, bones fractured, systems pushed far beyond recovery. The medics were the first to respond. As the gravity dropped below critical thresholds, their suits unlocked with sharp hisses, allowing movement again. They surged forward immediately, rushing toward the nearest survivors, scanning, stabilizing, prioritizing. Urgency returned. Chaos returned. But one thing didn't change. At the center of the chamber, the human was still standing. The weighted bar remained across his shoulders, though now it bent visibly, warped from the stress it had endured. His posture hadn't collapsed when the pressure eased. He hadn't dropped to his knees like the others. He simply adjusted. As the gravity lessened, his stance rose naturally, smoothly compensating for the shift without losing balance. His breathing slowed. His muscles relaxed, not from exhaustion, but from control. He lowered the bar at last. Carefully, deliberately. The metal hit the floor with a heavy clang, echoing through the chamber like the closing note of something final. Then he straightened. Fully. For the first time since the test began, there was no abnormal force pressing him down. No invisible weight. No crushing pressure. Just normal gravity. And yet, he didn't look relieved. Above, Varkesh watched in silence. The numbers on the display stabilized rapidly now. Systems recovered. Structural warnings faded one by one. The crisis was ending. But the realization was just beginning. Gravity returning to baseline, the technician reported, voice steadier now but still edged with disbelief. Containment stabilized. Reactor output normalizing. A pause. Then, quieter. Casualty reports incoming. Varkesh didn't ask for them. He already knew. His gaze remained fixed on the human. Because the casualties weren't the most important outcome of this test. The answer was. Below, the human rolled his shoulders once, then flexed his hands, as if shaking off the last remnants of strain. Subtle signs of effort remained, slight tension in his muscles, a faint heaviness in his breathing, but nothing close to the devastation that surrounded him. A medic approached cautiously, scanning device in hand. "Human," the alien said, voice uncertain. "Remain still. We need to assess." "I'm fine." The response was calm, simple, certain. The medic hesitated, ran another scan, then another. The readings didn't change. No critical damage. No internal failure. Nothing that matched what should have happened. "Confirmed," the medic said slowly, almost unable to believe it. "No major injuries detected." Nearby, another survivor stirred weakly, managing to lift their head just enough to see the impossible figure still standing. "How?" the alien rasped. The human glanced in their direction. "This time," he answered. "Gravity like that," he said, voice steady. "It's not new." The medic blinked. "Not new." The human gave a small shrug. "Not exactly like this, but close enough." He looked around the chamber again, at the damage, the fallen recruits, the aftermath of what had just happened. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "Earth's heavier than most places." Above, something shifted in Varkesh's expression. Not surprise. Not anymore. Understanding. Because the data had always been there. Filed. Categorized. Ignored. Earth. A high-gravity world by galactic standards. Not the highest, not extreme, but consistently above the norm. Enough to matter, enough to shape evolution, to forge biology under constant pressure, to demand strength not as an advantage, but as a requirement. Varkesh exhaled slowly. Of course. It wasn't just gravity. It was everything that came with it. Denser muscle fibers, stronger skeletal structure, cardiovascular systems built to function under greater load, and more than that, a lifetime of adaptation. Every human born, raised, and trained under conditions that others would consider stressful